My guest today is a leading dietitian and performance nutritionist who works with women to help them better understand how their body works and how to achieve optimal health. Now, her soon-to-be released book, Food for Menopause, is a wonderfully positive guide for women navigating the windy road to menopause. And it's a toolkit for women in their 40s and beyond to help them understand what's going on and to give practical and effective strategies to make the journey easier. In the end, it's all about the power of great nutrition, and that chimes with us at Breast Cancer UK because promoting wellness in women and reducing disease risks such as breast cancer through good nutrition is something we shout about a lot. Now, you may have seen my guest today on TV as the nutrition expert on loads of programs, including BBC Two Food's Truth or Scare, BBC One's Tomorrow's Food, Rip Off Britain, and also ITV's Save Money. I'm so pleased to welcome Dr Linia Patel to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Thalie.
Really thrilled to have you. Now, Linia, you have such an impressive body of work and a huge array of career achievements, but it would be lovely to hear from you about how you got here, really. So could you tell us a bit about your upbringing in Zambia and how it led you to dedicate your life to nutritional education?
Well, I, as you said, I'm born, bred and buttered in Zambia. I'm born in a tiny part of Zambia, in the middle of nowhere, really. So I grew up in the Zambian countryside, climbing trees and roaming around the savannah. Very idyllic, really. And, you know, I would love to say that actually my childhood had a direct influence on me choosing nutrition, but actually my heritage is that I'm half Zambian, half Indian. And Thalie, if you know what it's like to be brought up with an Indian father, is you get pushed to study sciences because what they're trying to do is set you up educationally, which I'm very grateful for. But I kind of got pushed to sciences, and luckily I was also good at my sciences. And within the pushing to science, you basically get given three choices in your career pattern: a doctor, an engineer, and a lawyer. And there's pretty much nothing else left on that choice. And so I was a very introverted child growing up, so there's no way I was going to be a lawyer. So I guess it left the other two options, which is an engineer and a doctor. And actually, fast forward to then when I was doing my A-levels, is I got a scholarship to study chemical engineering initially. But just before I was about to start, actually, the scholarship kind of fell through. And it meant, which was actually now in retrospect a blessing in disguise, it meant that I went to plan B, which was to take some time out to decide what I really wanted to do. And I actually thought, I really want to do something in healthcare, but not necessarily for people, for animals, because I think that would be easier to deal with than people. So my gap year was spent doing working as a veterinary science assistant, because I thought I was going to study to be a veterinary doctor. And that year basically put me off because I wasn't just making lovely dogs and cats better and talking to parrots. I was actually doing a lot of kind of farming veterinary science, because I suppose it was in Zambia, which is very much agricultural focused. So I kind of decided, actually, no, veterinary science is not for me. I will do medicine. And so long story short is I went to university in South Africa with the intention to do medicine, but because I wasn't South African, you can't apply for medicine straight away. You have to do a BSc first, and then after you graduate, you do a conversion degree and go into medicine. So that was my idea. And midway through my first degree, probably in my last year, you obviously have to get really good grades because the competition is quite stiff. And I was, putting the hours in the library, but I was also at the same time getting crippled with something called irritable bowel syndrome, which which is kind of stress related, actually. But that actually was a blessing in disguise, Thalie, because my GP at the time, 20 years ago, was very kind of holistic and forward thinking. And he said, you need to go see the dietitian. I had never in my life heard about dietetics or even knew what a dietitian did. And so that was my introduction into the world, the power of nutrition and the power of what we eat. Because when I saw the dietitian, she obviously gave me some advice, and that completely changed the way that I was feeling. And I then that summer studied that summer I went and did an internship with a dietitian, and the rest is history. I kind of loved the concept that what we could eat not only would have an influence on preventing a disease, but also if you've got the disease, have a real influence on your outcomes, on helping you get healthy as well. So that's why I kind of went into dietetics. But in retrospect, Thalie, my mum had a restaurant growing up. So actually I always grew around food, and I loved food, but I never ever thought that I could kind of be passionate about food in one way and make that my career. So I feel so lucky now that I actually, am able to work in something that I'm so passionate about.
It's incredible, really, that you had your sights set on a really specific kind of pathway, but actually your own personal health needs.
Yeah.
Led you in this direction. So on to women's health needs. You make a really important point in your book, actually, that women's lifestyles is missing from the general conversation. And that's actually a real concern that we share at Breast Cancer UK, because our lifestyle, what we eat, how active we are, our weight, for example, these all have a huge impact on our breast cancer risk. And actually, there are some risks, such as being overweight after the menopause. It's particularly concerning for breast cancer. But when it comes to menopause, I think it's safe to say it's been a bit of a data desert until recently. But these days, we are starting to see an upsurge in demand for information from women who basically just want to understand what's happening. But what I found really striking is the fact that you mentioned in your book that 3/4 of women don't know how their diet and lifestyle actually affect their menopause symptoms. So how has the lack of research and conversation on women's lifestyles in general, how has that affected women, and how important is it for us to start having these conversations now?
Fantastic question, Thalie. Well, I think, like you mentioned, women's health is neglected in research, and that basically means that we don't have personalized guidance that is focused on how a clinician like me needs to look after the woman in front of me. And I very quickly found that when I graduated, my first speciality was actually working in sports nutrition. And that basically was helping somebody who's already at the top to be a better version of themselves. And I very quickly learned as a junior sports dietitian that actually sometimes the guidance that I was giving, which was very much given to me in a male dimension, didn't quite fit with my female top performing athletes. And I go back to the research as a hungry dietitian to see, if I could glean and get some recommendations that would be specific to my women patients. And there was nothing there in the research. And so what's happened is that, women are not included in research because women are thought by scientists like myself to be complicated to include in studies. Because if you think about it, we can delineate our reproductive stages into so many stages. We can be, before we get our menstrual cycle, when we're having our menstrual cycle, even within our menstrual cycle, we have different phases: before ovulation, after ovulation. Then there's pregnancy, there's lactation, there's perimenopause, there's menopause, there's post-menopause. So all of these things basically pose challenges for scientists. And this is why actually women have not been included. But that then means that it's led over time to health inequalities because, we've not focused necessarily just on how we look after women. And if we just bring the menopause story here, there was some really poor science and research done, which meant that there was a whole generation of women who weren't even offered HRT because we thought that it, did increase your risk of cancer, for example. And we know that the narrative around that has been changing. So neglecting women in research has meant that we don't have personalized advice for them. But I think also the important thing is that normalizing conversations about what women go through. And I think that's led to a lot of widespread misinformation, particularly around the menopause, a lack of awareness of the fact that, there's 70 plus symptoms, and that the importance of diet and lifestyle in managing not only your symptoms, but you're reducing your risk of chronic diseases that actually increases as we go through the menopause as well. And so, being a dietitian and having so much experience in and the impact of lifestyle having an impact on how, not only someone can manage their symptoms, but how that can help them be the best version of themselves is what I'm so passionate about. And I think, like you're saying, we have more information now about the menopause than we've ever had, which is absolutely fantastic. Yeah. But for me, lifestyle is still missing in that. And, women come, excuse the pun, hungry to me for information, because even if sometimes there is information around what you should eat, sometimes that information is very confusing for women. They don't know practically how that means they should be eating for breakfast, lunch and dinner, what they should be snacking on, for example. Yeah.
And, you really sound like you're at the vanguard of this really exciting era of when we're going to start to understand the links between nutrition and all of our life stages as women, actually. But, as a woman, 50-year-old woman myself, the title of your book is total music to my ears, because I think I can totally relate to the fact that I care about nutrition, but I really don't understand how it relates to any of the symptoms I might have. And actually, many of our supporters at Breast Cancer UK, they're women over 45 who are concerned about menopause symptoms, but also breast cancer risk. And the two, as you mentioned, can be quite intertwined. And actually, you point out in your book that, most women actually don't know what to expect with the menopause. So while we are talking a lot about it, we still know so little. And as you say, these women are hungry to find out what they should be doing. So can you share with us, with our listeners, some of the advice that you give on what to expect, and also how lifestyle and food can actually affect symptoms of the menopause?
And the thing to say is that every woman's journey is unique to her. And whilst, the first chapter of my book is around understanding yourself, I'm very, very clear to also highlight that, there's 70 plus symptoms, and we are all different in the way that those symptoms manifest from one person to the next. And so I'm also a public health researcher, and prevention runs and pulsates through my blood. And so this book is not just for people who are 45, it's actually for people who are in their late 30s as well, because I want those younger women to pick up the book and to start to get to know themselves. So, the key thing is, if you know what your normal energy levels are, if you know what your normal concentration, perhaps what your normal body shape is, your normal libido is, energy levels, etc., then when there's deviations from that normal, you can start asking yourself questions around, okay, is that deviation just linked to perhaps what I did, what I ate, or actually is there a pattern here? And one of the things that I really advocate women to do, and is one of the big take-home messages from the first chapter, is know yourself by basically making symptom tracking a ritual in your self-care once you are in your early 40s. So grab a nice cup of tea, sit down, and there's a lovely kind of symptom tracker there, which basically is a checklist and saying, how are you feeling? How are you really feeling? And let's do a body scan from your head to your toe so that you start kind of knowing and picking up patterns. And with those patterns, you can go to a health professional and a clinician, and basically they can be able to give you so much more personalized support and care based on those symptoms.
Mm-hmm. And you actually use some really interesting stories at the beginning of your book of from a wide range of women who all come to you for advice and to help improve their menopause journey. And a lot of them will talk about symptoms that they just can't grapple with. And can you maybe talk to us about what they are and how it actually affects women? And you say it can affect us all differently, but there's such a variety, isn't there?
Yeah, and I would probably say the top three that women come see me for, one is related to kind of the cognitive and the mental aspects of it, which I don't think we talk enough about. So that could be the brain fog, that could be the mood roller coasters ride, or the crippling anxiety that perhaps women are facing. And then the next would be around energy levels, so feeling fatigued all the time. And, I work with a lot of women in the city in London, and they are women who are, juggling careers, full-on careers, and at the same time, women who perhaps have young children, looking after aging parents. There might have been women who could have managed to juggle all these balls before, but suddenly they just feel like they can't keep up, and something has changed and they're just not coping the same. So kind of the mental health aspect to it, the feeling, the energy level aspect to it. And then the third will probably be around weight and body shape. And so perhaps they would have tried to lose weight. What would have worked for them earlier on in their 30s actually won't work the same. And I think there's an interesting statistic here around the menopause transition, that even if you are on the same diet, there is a 7 to 30% increase in something that we call visceral fat, which is basically fat that accumulates around the abdomen. And so we know that with the changing hormones, what happens, Thalie, is that our body shape changes, because naturally we're more likely when we're younger to store fat around our hips, but that changes. And around the midlife, we store fat more easily around our abdomen. And we know that actually that is an increased risk for many
and breast cancer. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think the message I really want to get is, a lot of women that I see in my clinic come see me when they are at breaking point. And there's just no need for that. So again, the prevention and the proactiveness of this for me is a message that I really want to land loud and clear. So get to know yourself early and seek support when actually you start feeling like you're needing a little bit more support, because there's no need to wait until you're at breaking point to seek that.
Do you think one of the main issues with menopause at the moment is this terrible fear of the unknown? I mean, a lot of the dialogue that we hear, a lot of the narrative we hear is quite negative. So I think women are kind of geared towards having a negative expectation. And what you're proposing here is something quite different. It's more about, well, actually just knowledge is power. And this isn't a disease, menopause. No. It's something very natural. So, how can we help change that narrative so that we're not all kind of bracing ourselves? And I think to a large extent, is it down to the fact that it's that fear of the unknown?
Yeah, and I think that, probably the combination of the fear and the unknown, the fact that our mothers and our grandmothers didn't talk about it, and it was something that we would always thought we had to grin and bear. So 100% we need to change the narrative, because 100% of women born female will go through it. So it is inevitable. And I am so passionate about empowering women to be active participants in determining how they age. And that's where, for me, the lifestyle piece comes in big time. Because whether or not you choose to take hormone replacement therapy, lifestyle matters. Because our hormones, they take cues from what we eat, how we sleep, and how we move. And a lot of the symptoms that we experience could be managed by actually really getting on top of making sure that we are eating to manage our blood sugar levels, which I'll talk about a little bit more. We also know that in terms of physiological changes that happen in the body, we have higher levels of what we call systemic inflammation. Now, a lot of chronic diseases out there, including breast cancer, they stem from inflammation at some level. And so managing or eating in a way to cool that inflammation is just going to reduce our risk of those chronic diseases. And also, the big thing about in the nutrition at the moment is gut health. And it has been big for the last 10 or so years. And we know that as our hormones change, as we're in our 40s and approaching our 50s, we also have changes in terms of our gut bacteria. So really learning to look at our health through the lens of our gut bacteria is so important. And more importantly, eating not just for ourselves, but eating to nourish our gut bacteria being really, really important. But, I'll be doing you a disfavor to say it's all about what you eat, because in performance nutrition, which is the world that I come from, is we look at things in a 360-degree holistic view. So if I'm eating the best diet possible, but I'm not spending enough time in bed, I'm stressed out my socks, and I'm not moving, then actually it doesn't matter, So it's about making sure that you look at wellness with all these pillars. And actually sleep is the foundation. And then the other wellness pillars being nutrition, movement, and managing stress being just as pivotal as what you eat.
And sleep, is also an area that can be impacted So I suppose sometimes there's a bit of a vicious circle, isn't there? And women might feel frantic thinking, well, how can I address sleep when actually that's one of my symptoms? And, so what are some kind of very practical tips you have for overcoming a lot of these symptoms that seem to be, or can become quite pervasive, I suppose?
Yeah, and maybe I'll start with nutrition because that is my jam and what the book is based on nutrition, but it brings in the other pillars, and then we'll talk about the other pillars as well. So, whilst every woman's journey, Thalie, is different, there are some core fundamental principles that all women should be adopting, especially as they go through this transition. And so, in the book, I talk about the foundations being the first one. Sounds super, super easy and maybe far too easy, but I tend to find that women don't do it. And in fact, not many people do it, not just women, is hydration. So making sure you hydrate because, our bodies are 70% water. And so if we don't hydrate, things like brain fog become worse.
Wow.
Things like appetite control are affected. So if we're already kind of struggling with our weight and we're dehydrated, we're more likely to actually overeat. And so just learning to make sure that you're drinking enough water, drinking it at the right time so that you're not drinking it as soon as when you get home and walk through the door. And so then you're having to wake up in the night to go pee because absolutely do not want your sleep disturbed. Small things like that being really important. So stay well hydrated. And the second one is learn to eat to manage your blood sugar control. Now, blood sugar management in nutrition is the cornerstone to nutrition. And it's something that I would be counseling, everybody who comes to see me in clinic about. And that basically means that you're eating in a way that is balanced. So you're eating the right type of carbohydrates. So carbohydrates that are slow release. So that could be things like your steel-cut oats. It could be your seeded bread. It could be things like brown rice or red rice, or things like quinoa or sweet potato. But you're also making sure that you're including protein. Now, I tend to find that a lot of women don't eat enough protein. Men tend to be better at protein, but we don't. And so making sure you're eating enough protein, particularly at breakfast. So bringing in things like Greek yogurt, which not only gives us our protein, but also gives us our probiotics, which we know are good for our gut bacteria, and also good in terms of, I think there's a link there that I read a paper around prevention of breast cancer as well, the probiotics being very beneficial. And then you're eating, obviously, your vegetables as well. So getting that balance in terms of your plate and how then that has a positive impact on your blood sugar control is really, really important. Because if your blood sugar levels are not controlled, so if you're eating very sugary foods or refined carbohydrates all the time, and your blood sugar levels are doing this kind of roller coaster ride, that not only has a negative impact on your mood, which you might be struggling with, but it's going to affect your brain fog. It's also going to affect your hot flushes. It's going to have an impact on your weight and your risk of lots of chronic diseases, including breast cancer. And so we want to make sure that we're managing our blood sugars. So not becoming necessarily obsessed with it, but making sure we're getting on top of that. And then the two other pillars that are important is eating to cool inflammation. Now, what I mean by that is basically eating in a way that is kind of like the Mediterranean diet. It's one of those diets that is touted to be anti-inflammatory. And the reason for that is they base a lot of their diet on eating in season and eating lots and lots of fruit and vegetables that are different colors. And all the different colors in those fruit and vegetables basically contain these plant compounds called polyphenols or flavonoids. They have loads of different names, but those are just thought to have so many positive benefits for the body, including cooling down inflammation. And so, the Mediterranean diet, because, I live half the time in Italy, and so I have first-hand experience of it.
Lucky you.
It's not a diet, I know, very, very blessed. It's not a diet that forbids you ever eating, your favorite foods, but it's all around moderation and quality and how you enjoy that food, So they really focus on, if it is Sundays here, for example, when the sun is shining, they go out and get their gelatos. The whole family goes out for a gelato. but they really focus on eating it in a mindful way. So it's not just also what we eat, it's how we're eating that's important as well. And then, the third pillar I talk about is this idea of gut health. And so, one of my top tips for women actually is eat more fiber. In the UK, the fiber recommendations are that we should be eating 30 grams a day, but majority of us eating about half of that. And so one of the things that you need to get really good at if you're eating for your gut bacteria is learning to eat more fiber. So that means including things like beans and lentils and pulses into your diet. It also means making that swap from refined carbohydrates to whole grain carbohydrates, and then eating lots of those fruit and vegetables as well, because they give you your fiber. And there's so many other things in there, but also what I love is my recipes come with the idea that basically all the recipes are to help manage your blood sugar levels in some way. So I'm bringing in those healthy carbohydrates in the right proportions. And then where I perhaps have things like risotto, which are very carbohydrate heavy, then I've made some tips and suggestions to make sure that you're still getting that optimum balance in terms of your blood sugar levels as well. And then in terms of anti-inflammatory nutrition, what does that look like when it's on a plate? Well, the food is full of flavor. It's got lots of herbs and spices, which we know are also an important and integral part of not just the Mediterranean diet, but actually those herbs and spices have those plant chemicals that also help cool off inflammation as well. And then the recipes would also contain things like, your prebiotics, so things like your Greek yogurt or your kefir, to make sure that I'm bringing in those fermented foods as well. And also making sure that I'm getting as much fiber coming through, even in things like your treats. Like I've got a recipe there, which is chocolate chip cookies made with a secret ingredient, and that secret ingredient is a can of chickpeas. So it's actually bringing in fiber. Yeah, exactly. Bringing in fiber and in
hiding the goodness.
Exactly. But I don't want to hide it all the time, but actually making sure that we're actually using every opportunity that we feed ourselves to bringing in that magical fiber ingredient.
Okay, so people can't get a hold of your book right now, but when can they?
So the book comes out on the 12th of September. So I'm very excited for that. And you can find out more information about the book if you just follow me on all my different social media channels. So that would be Linia Nutrition, or at Dr Linia, or even just Linia Patel. If you just Google that, you'll find more information about me and the book.
Brilliant. And thank you so much for this amazing advice. The kind of when you eat, time of the day when you have your protein, things like that, and your fiber, these aren't things that most of us think about. So it's really valuable to hear it from you. Now, I'm going to move on to the final part of our interview, which is our Be Well questions that we ask all of our guests. The first one is, for someone like you who really has a wonderful reputation for wellness, do you actually have any guilty pleasures?
Oh my God, Thalie, so many. So many. But I probably will say one of my top guilty pleasures is fizzy drinks. And that's perhaps because I grew up where, because I was in the middle of nowhere and supermarkets were quite far away, fizzy drinks were kind of associated as a real treat. So I love a good fizzy drink. But, being a dietitian, I know that I can't necessarily be indulging in fizzy drinks all the time. And so what I've done in the book is put in also a section on drinks. And that's important for me because firstly, whilst I love fizzy drinks, I know that I can't be having too much sugar. So I've created drinks that are going to be much less, that are much lower in sugar. But also, we know that there's, while you can drink alcohol when you're going through the menopause, it's worth keeping an eye on it, because alcohol and menopause are not the best combinations for many reasons, even in terms of breast cancer risk, we know that. And so, just telling people to hold a glass of water with a slice slice of lemon in it also doesn't cut it. So I thought it was really important to actually put a section in the book which actually brought home some of my favorite recipes. Like my grandmother Sarah, when we were sick, would make what we called liquid gold, which is basically using the pineapple, the outside of the pineapple, once we've eaten the pineapple, because I come from the area in Zambia, which is the best pineapples ever. And she would just boil the pineapple skins with some turmeric, and it actually makes the loveliest lemonade.
Oh, how wonderful. Oh, that's making me thirsty. I've been thinking my glass of water is empty, and now you're talking about lovely golden syrup. That's making me very thirsty. Okay, so you do have guilty pleasures. That's good to hear. What about, you're about to release your book, which is really exciting, but do you have something else on your bucket list that you'd like to accomplish?
Yes, I'm going to talk about one that I'm going to do in a couple of weeks, which is a more physical challenge, which is I'm going to be taking part in the Camino de Santiago. I don't know if you know about it.
Yes,
it's kind of
the pilgrimage
walk. Yeah. So I'm not going to do it all in one go, but I'm kind of breaking it up. But I'm super excited about that because, walking is so good for us. I am a runner and I love running, but my knees are delicate. And so walking is a kind of nice thing to do, and walking in nature is a wonderful way to fill up my bucket, and just really looking forward to it.
Wow, I'm just, that is on my bucket list too. I was supposed to do it for my 40th birthday. I was going to meet with friends, and then something happened, I can't remember, but it got cancelled in the end. So I haven't made it. So it's still on my bucket list, maybe for my 60th.
Well, I will give you some tips.
Yes, please. Okay, so final question is there a book or a film, a podcast maybe, that's inspired you to be well?
Oh, now I am an absolute podcast addict. Listening is definitely my mode of learning. And I'm probably just going to plug a couple because I'm very holistic in my view of wellness, so body, mind, spirit type of thing. So I would say being well for me is learning to nourish all elements of myself. And so probably I have a couple. In terms of body, I would say particularly with the whole menopause idea in my mind, I quite like listening to Liz Earle or Louise Newson in terms of podcasts, because it's fantastic practical information just around how you can become an active participant as you age. And then in terms of mind, I'll probably go something it depends on my mood again, but something motivational, like Oprah does her Super Soul Sunday. I don't know if you've listened to some of those conversations, fantastic conversations. And then, outside of work, my faith is very important to me. So I guess nourishing my soul also means listening to things like, podcasts like Elevation Church, or my own church, which is kind of Hillsong Milan as well, their podcast.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, your knowledge, and your fantastic tips. I'm sure our listeners are going to thoroughly enjoy it. It's been a pleasure to meet you, Linia.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been an absolute honor to speak to you.